What happens when there is nowhere left to run? When fire surrounds you, doors are sealed, air grows thin, and death stands only seconds away? This is not a story from ancient history. This is not a metaphor. This is not a movie scene. This is the true account of a night when human strength completely failed and only trust in Allah remained. In a remote Muslim community, worshippers had gathered for prayer, unaware that their faith was about to be tested in the most brutal way possible. Armed bandits surrounded their place of worship, locked every exit, and set it on fire. The flames rose fast. Smoke filled the room. Children cried. Elders whispered prayers. Every worldly escape was gone. At that moment, no plan could save them. No weapon could protect them. No human help could reach them. All that remained was sujud, dua, and complete surrender to Allah. And then, something happened that defies logic, science, and expectation. The fire continued to burn, but it did not burn them. What unfolded next was not luck, it was not coincidence. It was a reminder written in flames. When Allah decides to protect, even fire becomes harmless. This is not just a story of survival. It is a testimony of iman, sabr, and divine protection, and it begins now. In a quiet and remote part of Africa, far from the noise of big cities and global headlines, there existed a small Muslim community whose life revolved around simplicity, faith, and mutual care. This was not a place of wealth or power. The homes were modest, the roads unpaved, and daily life depended on hard work under the sun. Yet despite having very little, the people believed they had something priceless: trust in Allah. At the center of this community stood a humble masjid. It was not built with marble or grand domes, but with basic materials: mud bricks, wooden beams, and a metal roof that echoed loudly when rain fell. Still, for the people of the village, this masjid was their heart. It was where they prayed together, sought guidance, shared sorrow, and thanked Allah for whatever He had given them. Every day began with the call to Fajr. Men would walk quietly through the early morning darkness, women prepared water for wudu at home, and children learned from a young age that prayer was not a burden, but a source of peace. The community imam was a calm, soft-spoken man, known not for eloquent speeches, but for his sincerity. He often reminded the people of one simple truth: fear leaves the heart when reliance on Allah enters it. These people were not unaware of the world beyond their village. News traveled through radios, travelers, and whispered conversations. They had heard of violence in nearby regions, armed bandits, attacks on villages, and growing instability. Such stories caused concern, but not panic. The community believed that life and death were in Allah's hands alone, and no amount of fear could change what was written. The imam would often address this concern after prayer. He did not promise safety or worldly protection. Instead, he spoke about sabr and tawakkul, patience and trust. If a trial comes, he said, it comes with Allah's permission. And if protection comes, it also comes with His permission. Women in the village taught their children short du'as before sleep. Elders spent evenings in quiet remembrance of Allah. The people did not see faith as something reserved for moments of crisis. It was woven into their daily routine. Their belief was not loud, dramatic, or performative. It was steady, grounded, and deeply rooted. No one in the village imagined that their faith would soon be tested in the most terrifying way possible. They had gathered so many times before in that masjid, standing shoulder to shoulder in prayer, never questioning that they would return home afterward. That night, like many others, began the same way, with worship, calm hearts, and complete trust in Allah. They did not know that within hours, their masjid would be surrounded, their escape cut off, and their belief placed in the fire, literally. And when that moment arrived, everything they had ever believed would be tested. As days passed, a quiet unease began to settle over the region. It did not arrive suddenly or loudly. Instead, it crept in through fragments of information, broken stories shared by travelers, short radio broadcasts, and rumors carried by those who had fled from nearby villages. Armed bandits were moving through the area, attacking settlements without warning, burning homes, and leaving destruction behind them. No one knew exactly where they would strike next. The people of the village listened carefully, but they did not allow fear to rule their hearts. After prayer, small groups would gather in the courtyard of the masjid, speaking in low voices. Some wondered if the danger would reach them. Others believed their remoteness would keep them unnoticed. The imam listened more than he spoke, observing the concern on their faces. One evening, after the Isha prayer, he addressed the community. His words were calm, not dramatic. "Fear does not protect us," he said, "and panic does not change destiny. What protects us is remembrance of Allah and unity among ourselves." He reminded them that trials had always been part of human history. Comfort was never guaranteed, but guidance was. The people nodded in agreement, reassured not because danger had disappeared, but because their hearts were anchored in something greater than danger itself. Still, small changes began to appear. Families returned home earlier than usual. Mothers kept their children closer. The night felt quieter, heavier. Even the sounds of animals seemed distant, as if the land itself was holding its breath. Despite this, the masjid remained full. Attendance did not decrease. In fact, more people came, seeking peace and prayer. Some suggested reducing gatherings at night, fearing an attack. The imam did not dismiss their concern, but he gently reminded them that abandoning worship out of fear was not protection. "We take reasonable steps," he said, "but we do not trade our faith for false safety." The community decided to remain vigilant without becoming divided. They arranged simple watch routines, kept lamps nearby, and agreed to inform one another of any unusual movement. These actions were not born from fear, but responsibility. On the day it happened, nothing felt unusual at first. The sun set as it always did, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and red. Men walked toward the masjid for Maghrib prayer, greeting one another with quiet smiles. Children lingered near the entrance, and elders took their familiar places inside. No one knew that beyond the darkness, engines were approaching. No one sensed that weapons were being loaded or that fire was being prepared. The community stood in prayer, unaware that the test they had spoken about so often was no longer distant. It was at their doorstep, and when it arrived, it would come without mercy, forcing every heart inside that masjid to confront fear, surrender, and faith all at once. The moment arrived without warning. As the congregation stood inside the masjid after Maghrib prayer, a distant sound cut through the quiet of the evening. At first it was faint, like thunder rolling far away. Then it grew louder, sharper, unmistakable. Engines, multiple engines. Moving fast, before anyone could react, shouts echoed from outside. Harsh voices, unfamiliar and aggressive, shattered the calm that had filled the masjid moments earlier. Panic rippled through the room. Children clutched their mothers. Elders turned their heads toward the doors. The imam raised his hand, signaling for silence, his face steady despite the fear tightening around every heart. Within seconds, armed men appeared at every entrance. They moved with coordination, surrounding the masjid completely. Before anyone could step outside, the doors were slammed shut from the outside. Heavy objects were dragged against them. The sound of metal scraping against wood sent a chill through the room. Then came the smell. Fuel. It spread quickly, sharp and suffocating, seeping through the cracks of the walls. Some realized immediately what was happening. Others understood only when flames suddenly erupted along the outer walls, lighting the night with an angry orange glow. The heat rose fast. Smoke began to creep inside, thick and dark. Inside the masjid, fear reached its peak. Children cried openly now. A few people rushed toward the doors, pounding on them, shouting for mercy. Their voices were met with laughter and gunfire into the air. The message was clear: there would be no escape. The imam stepped forward, his voice firm but controlled. "Come back," he said. "Stay together." Slowly, reluctantly, the people gathered again. The doors would not open. The windows were too high and too small. Flames surrounded them from every side. Breathing became harder. The fire crackled loudly, consuming everything it touched outside. This was the moment when hope, in every worldly sense, disappeared. There was no help coming. No one knew they were trapped. No force on earth could reach them in time. Some fell to the floor in despair. Others whispered broken prayers, their voices trembling. The imam looked around the room, at the frightened faces, the children clinging to their parents, the elders who had lived long lives and now faced death together. He knew there were no instructions he could give to save them physically, so he gave the only instruction that mattered. "Turn to Allah," he said quietly. "This moment is His." One by one, people stopped running. Hands were raised, foreheads touched the ground. In the middle of fire and smoke, the masjid filled not with screams, but with whispered supplications. Outside, the attackers waited, convinced that the flames would do their work. Inside, something far more powerful was happening, and though no one could yet see it, the test had reached its final stage. As the fire intensified outside, time inside the masjid seemed to slow. The crackling of flames and the thickening smoke pressed heavily on every breath. Fear was present, undeniable, but it no longer ruled the room. Something else had taken its place. The imam stood quietly at the front, his eyes moving from face to face. He did not shout. He did not command. His voice, when he spoke, was calm, almost gentle. "We have reached a moment," he said, "where nothing belongs to us anymore. Our lives, our fear, our hope, everything belongs to Allah." Those words settled into the hearts of the people. The panic that had driven some to the doors faded. One by one, they returned to their places. Mothers pulled their children close. Elders leaned on the walls for support. Then, without instruction, people began to lower themselves to the ground. Foreheads touched the floor. This was not a sujood of routine. It was a sujood of surrender. In the darkness and smoke, whispered dua filled the air. Some asked for protection. Some asked for forgiveness. Some asked only that their children be spared. Others did not ask for escape at all, only that Allah be pleased with them in their final moments. The imam knelt among them, Gadfasa. He did not raise his hands dramatically. He did not promise survival. He simply said, quietly and clearly, "O Allah, you are our protector. You are sufficient for us." Those words were repeated again and again, not shouted, not forced, just spoken with trembling voices that carried complete trust. The people knew that if this was the end, it would be an end written by Allah, not taken by human cruelty. Outside, the fire continued to roar. The attackers waited, certain that time was on their side. Inside, something remarkable was happening, though no one yet realized it. The fear of death was slowly being replaced by a deep, unexplainable calm. Breathing became steadier, hearts slowed. Even the children, moments earlier overwhelmed by terror, grew quiet in their parents' arms. The smoke was still there. The heat was still present, but the panic, the crushing panic, was gone. In that moment, the masjid no longer felt like a prison. It felt like a place of meeting. A place where every soul had placed its trust fully in Allah, without conditions or demands. No one could see beyond the walls of fire. No one knew what would happen next. There was no sign, no sound, no announcement from the sky. Only submission, only tawakkul, only the certainty that whatever came next would not be random. It would be by Allah's will. And it was at that exact point, when surrender was complete, that the situation began to change. Something began to change, but not in a way anyone expected. The fire outside the masjid was still raging. Flames climbed the walls, licking the roof, crackling loudly as they consumed wood and metal. From the outside, it looked as though nothing inside could survive. Smoke continued to drift through the openings, and the orange glow of the flames illuminated the interior in flickering light. Yet inside the masjid, those in sujud began to notice something strange. The heat that should have been unbearable was not burning their skin. The floor beneath their foreheads felt warm, but not painful. Breathing, which moments earlier had felt heavy and suffocating, became easier. The smoke was present, but it did not choke them as it should have. One man slowly lifted his head from the ground, confused. He looked at his hands, expecting burns. There were none. A woman clutched her child tightly, realizing that the child was breathing calmly, not coughing, not gasping. An elder whispered softly, almost afraid to speak, "The fire, it is not harming us." No one stood up immediately. No one shouted. Fear had taught them caution. But as seconds passed, it became impossible to ignore what was happening. Flames surrounded them, yet they were untouched. The imam raised his head and looked around the room. His face reflected neither shock nor pride, but humility. He did not declare a miracle. He did not celebrate. He only said quietly, "This is from Allah." The fire continued to burn outside, but inside the masjid, it felt as if a barrier existed, one unseen, unmeasured, and beyond human understanding. The air was not scorching, skin was not blistering, hearts, instead of racing, were steady. Some wept, not out of fear, but out of realization. Others remained in silent sujud, unwilling to lift their heads, afraid that movement might break whatever protection surrounded them. Children looked around with wide eyes, sensing that something extraordinary was happening, even if they could not understand it. Time passed, though no one could tell how much. Minutes felt like moments. Moments felt suspended. The fire did not suddenly disappear. The danger did not dramatically end. Instead, it simply lost its power. What was meant to destroy them no longer had authority over them. Outside, the attackers waited for screams that never came. Inside, there was no panic, only a quiet awareness that Allah's decree was unfolding in a way no human could plan or predict. The people remained where they were, surrounded by flames, alive, unharmed, and protected. Not because of anything they had done, but because Allah had willed it so. And though they did not yet know what would happen next, one truth was already clear. When Allah decides to protect, even fire must obey. As the realization settled that the flames were no longer harming them, a profound stillness filled the masjid. It was not the stillness of shock, but the stillness of hearts finding certainty. No one rushed to stand. No one tried to test the fire. The people remained where they were, careful, humble, and deeply aware that what surrounded them was not safety of their own making. Then, softly at first, a voice whispered words of remembrance. "Hasbi Allahu la ilaha illa huwa." Another voice joined, then another. Soon the masjid was filled with quiet dhikr, not loud, not dramatic, but steady and sincere. These were not chants meant to impress. They were the natural response of hearts that had witnessed Allah's protection in the most unexpected moment. The imam remained kneeling, his head lowered. He did not raise his hands in triumph. He did not instruct the people to celebrate. Instead, he reminded them gently, "Stay with Allah, do not let your hearts turn away." Children, sensing the calm of their parents, stopped trembling. One child asked in a whisper why the fire was still there but did not hurt them. The mother kissed the child's forehead and replied softly, "Because Allah is with us." The fire continued to crackle outside, but inside the atmosphere felt entirely different. The smoke no longer burned their throats. Breathing felt normal. Time felt distant. Some people closed their eyes, not from fear, but from overwhelming gratitude. For many, this moment reshaped something deep inside them. Faith, which had always been part of their lives, was no longer just belief, it was certainty. Not borrowed from words or lessons, but written into memory. No one spoke of survival. No one spoke of escape. There was no bargaining with Allah, no conditional promises. What existed was acceptance, complete and peaceful. Outside, the attackers grew uneasy. They had expected screams, chaos, and death. Instead, there was silence. Inside the burning structure, no sound of suffering reached them. The longer they waited, the more the situation unsettled them. Inside the masjid, the people felt none of that fear. Their focus was inward. Some whispered gratitude, others asked Allah to protect their community beyond this night. A few prayed not for themselves, but for guidance for those who had tried to harm them. This was not a moment of victory over enemies, it was a moment of closeness to Allah. The people understood something without anyone explaining it. This protection was not a reward for bravery, nor a sign of superiority. It was a reminder of Allah's power, mercy, and absolute control. They remained patient. They remained grounded. They remained in remembrance. And while the fire still burned, something else was beginning to collapse, not inside the masjid, but outside it. Outside the masjid, confusion began to spread among the attackers. What they expected to hear never came. There were no screams, no desperate cries for mercy, no sounds of panic. The fire had been burning long enough. By every assumption they carried, no one inside should still be alive. Yet the silence disturbed them. One of the bandits stepped closer, shielding his face from the heat, listening carefully. He expected coughing, movement, anything that confirmed death. Instead, the only sound that reached his ears was something unfamiliar. Soft, steady voices, speaking words he could not fully understand, but whose calmness unsettled him. Another attacker shouted angrily, demanding answers. No one responded. The flames continued to rise, yet the stillness inside remained unbroken. A doubt entered their minds. Fire was supposed to terrify. Fire was meant to destroy resolve. But whatever was happening inside that structure did not follow the rules they knew. Some of the men began arguing among themselves. One insisted they should leave. Another accused him of cowardice. A third stood silent, staring at the fire with growing unease. The confidence that had fueled their violence began to fracture. One of them whispered, "This is not normal." Fear does not always arrive suddenly. Sometimes it grows slowly, like a shadow creeping forward when the light begins to change. That is what happened to them. The longer the silence lasted, the heavier their fear became. Inside the masjid, the worshippers felt none of this tension. They were unaware of the arguments, the hesitation, or the growing dread outside. Their hearts were occupied with something else: remembrance, surrender, and trust. But outside, the attackers felt something they had not planned for: loss of control. They had weapons, they had numbers, they had fire. Yet none of it produced the outcome they expected. The absence of screams felt louder than any noise. One man stepped back, his voice trembling. He said the fire looked different. Another claimed the structure should have collapsed by now. Their leader tried to assert authority, ordering them to wait longer, but his voice no longer carried certainty. Fear had begun to change sides. The attackers were used to power flowing in one direction, from them to others. That night, power felt unreachable, distant, and beyond their command. Whatever was happening inside the masjid was not something they could fight. Some of them began to leave quietly, not running, just backing away, pretending they were repositioning. Others followed, unwilling to admit what they felt. Eventually, only a few remained, staring at the flames with eyes that reflected confusion more than anger. Inside, the believers remained patient. Outside, the attackers felt exposed. This moment marked a shift, not because anyone fought back, not because anyone challenged them, but because the certainty of violence collapsed under something stronger: steadfast faith and the unseen protection of Allah. The fire still burned, but courage had moved inward, and fear had stepped outside. Slowly, almost without anyone noticing at first, the fire began to change. It did not vanish suddenly. There was no dramatic moment where the flames were extinguished all at once. Instead, the intensity weakened. The crackling grew softer. The heat that once pressed against the walls receded, as if the fire itself was retreating under a command it could not resist. Inside the masjid, the worshippers sensed the shift. The air felt clearer. Breathing became easier. The smoke that had once filled the space thinned, drifting upward and away. People opened their eyes, not in alarm, but in quiet awareness. The imam lifted his head for the first time in what felt like hours. His face was marked with soot, yet his expression was calm. He looked around slowly, ensuring that everyone was present, that no one was harmed. Children sat close to their parents, tired but unharmed. Elders leaned against the walls, steady and composed. No one rushed toward the exits. They waited. Outside, the flames no longer roared with the same hunger. The structure still bore the marks of fire, blackened walls, scorched beams, but it had not collapsed. The attackers were gone now. Their footsteps, their voices, their engines had faded into the night, leaving behind nothing but silence. When the fire had weakened enough to allow movement, the Imam spoke softly, instructing everyone to leave calmly and together. One by one, they stepped outside into the cool night air. The contrast was striking. The night sky was clear. Stars shone above, indifferent to the chaos that had just passed. The village stood quiet, untouched beyond the area around the masjid. It felt as though the world had paused, allowing this moment to exist undisturbed. As the people gathered outside, they looked back at the building. By all logic, it should have been reduced to ashes. Instead, it stood, damaged, scarred, but standing. They checked one another carefully. No burns, no injuries, no signs of smoke damage. The soot on their clothes and skin wiped away easily, revealing unhurt flesh beneath. Some fell into sujood on the ground outside, overcome by gratitude. Others stood silently, hands clasped, eyes filled with tears they had not yet allowed to fall. This was the moment realization fully arrived. What had happened inside those walls could not be explained by chance or timing. It was not a narrow escape, it was not luck. It was protection, clear, deliberate, and beyond human control. No one celebrated loudly. No one shouted. The weight of what they had witnessed demanded humility, not noise. They understood that this night would not be remembered as the night of fire. It would be remembered as the night Allah reminded them. That nothing in creation moves without His permission, that fear belongs only to those who rely on power other than Him, and that faith, when tested sincerely, is never left unanswered. And as the last embers faded, something else remained burning quietly within them: certainty. As the night passed and dawn approached, the reality of what had occurred began to spread beyond the small group of survivors. Nearby villagers, who had hidden in fear during the attack, slowly emerged. They approached the masjid cautiously, expecting devastation, expecting loss. Instead, they found something they could not understand. The building was burned, but standing. The people were shaken, but unharmed. 56 worshippers who should not have survived were alive, breathing normally, and physically intact. Questions came immediately. Some asked how long the fire had burned. Others wanted to know how the exits had remained blocked. A few stood silently, simply observing the scene with disbelief written across their faces. The Imam did not rush to speak. He knew that explanations would not satisfy every mind. What had happened could not be proven through arguments. It could only be witnessed. By morning, local authorities arrived. They examined the structure, the burn patterns, the remains of fuel containers left behind. They interviewed the survivors individually. Each account aligned with the others, not in dramatic detail, but in calm consistency. Medical workers checked the worshippers carefully. Lungs were clear, skin showed no burns. Children showed no signs of trauma beyond exhaustion. The findings puzzled even the professionals. One doctor shook his head and said quietly, "There is no medical reason for this." News traveled quickly. People from nearby towns came to see the masjid for themselves. Some arrived skeptical. Others arrived curious. Many arrived with fear. What they saw challenged all of them. Qur'ans that had been inside the masjid were recovered. Their covers were darkened by soot, but the pages inside were untouched. Prayer mats showed scorch marks around their edges, yet the center remained intact. These were not presented as symbols. They were simply facts. Among the crowd were elders who remembered stories from the Quran, stories of fire losing its power by Allah's command. But no one compared. No one claimed equivalence. This was not about proving anything, it was about witnessing. Even among the attackers, the story did not remain hidden. One of them, captured days later, reportedly spoke of confusion and rage. He described expecting screams and death, but instead encountering silence and calm. He could not explain it. He did not try to justify himself. Fear had followed him beyond that night. Back in the village, the survivors gathered again, not in the damaged masjid, but in the open air. There were no speeches, no declarations, only dua. They asked Allah to protect them from pride. They asked Him to keep their hearts firm. They asked that this event not become a source of arrogance but a reminder of dependence. They understood something deeply now. This was not their story to own. It was a sign to carry with humility. And as the testimony spread, it did not spread as a tale of fire, but as a quiet question placed into the hearts of those who heard it. If Allah can protect in this way, then what does true reliance really mean? In the weeks that followed, life slowly returned to the village, but nothing was truly the same. The masjid was repaired, burned beams were replaced, walls were strengthened. Yet everyone knew that what mattered most had not been rebuilt with bricks or wood. What changed that night lived inside hearts. The worshippers who survived did not walk differently, speak louder, or claim special status. If anything, they became quieter, more careful, more aware of how fragile life truly is and how complete reliance belongs only to Allah. Before that night, faith had been sincere but familiar. Prayers were part of routine. Trust existed, but it shared space with planning, fear, and assumptions about safety. After the fire, something shifted. Fear lost its authority. Not because danger disappeared, but because certainty replaced panic. The believers had seen with their own lives that protection does not come from walls, locks, or numbers, but from Allah alone. They did not seek attention. When people came asking for details, the Imam reminded them gently, "Do not look at us. Look at what Allah does when hearts rely on Him." Some visitors expected excitement. Others wanted dramatic retellings. Instead, they found humility, gratitude, silence where arrogance could have grown. Children returned to learning Quran. Elders resumed teaching. The community rebuilt not just the masjid, but their understanding of tawakkul, true reliance. This story did not become a weapon. It became a responsibility. The Imam often reminded the congregation, Allah did not save us so we would feel superior. He saved us so we would remember who truly controls fire, fear, and life itself. The attackers were not cursed publicly. No calls for revenge echoed through the village. Instead, dua was made for guidance, for protection, and for hearts hardened by violence. The lesson was clear. When believers surrender completely, Allah's help arrives in ways the mind cannot calculate. Not always through escape, not always by removing hardship. Sometimes by changing the nature of the hardship itself. Fire did not disappear that night. Its power did. And that is the deeper reminder. Every generation faces its own fire. Fear, injustice, loss, uncertainty. Not all fires burn buildings. Some burn hearts quietly. This story stands as a witness that when nothing else remains, reliance on Allah is never misplaced, because when Allah protects, no force can harm, and when Allah tests, He never abandons. The fire ended, but the lesson did not, and it never will.